Hi, everybody. I'm Diane Brady. I am here with Adam Bryant, who is Senior Managing Director of the ExCo Group. Also, of course, Adam, I know you as the former columnist at the New York Times doing the corner office. Nice to see you.
You too, Diane. Thank you.
You've got a new book out, The Leap to Leader, How Ambitious Managers Make the Jump to Leadership. This is your fourth book, right, on leadership?
Exactly, yeah.
I want to start by asking, especially as a journalist, what have you gleaned in the move to now working with leaders? Because you must get insights that you didn't get when they were coming to you on their best behavior to get into the New York Times.
Yeah. So I left journalism about 5 years ago to join the ExCo Group. Our core business is one-on-one mentoring at the C-suite level. We also do work with leadership teams and cohorts of up-and-coming leaders. You know, a few insights. I mean, as I've spent more time in big companies, things that sort of pop to mind. One is that the simplest questions are the hardest. The simple question of what is your strategy? I find that that's as easy it is for companies to come up with an answer to that question, the answer that's clear to everybody and that provides actual direction for the company. I mean, I didn't go to business school. I used to assume that when somebody said the word strategy, that everybody knew what that meant. But I've come to appreciate that word itself is kind of a Rorschach test, classic ink blot. It means different things to different people. So, some of the patterns that I've seen are just when you ask people, like, what's the strategy? People go to very high altitude and essentially provide a job description for the company, right? They just describe what the company does rather than what the plan is, or they dive really deep into the details and give you their to-do list for the next quarter and say, this is our strategy. So that's one of the challenges. I mean, I think one of the most universal leadership challenges too is around self-awareness. I mean, we all have an intention of how we want to show up in the world. But perception is reality when you are a leader. It's how people perceive you. And I think one of the biggest challenges for senior leaders is just to make sure that they can close that gap between how they want to show up and how they're actually perceived. Some of the other key lessons around communication. If you're a senior leader, you might be saying to yourself, like, why do I need to say this again? I mean, I just said it at the last all hands meeting.
Right.
And the point is, you've got to just keep repeating it. You almost have to be like a politician with a stump speech. And part of, to me, one of the key insights I heard from a CEO was that you can never leave a void of communication, because if you leave a void, people will fill it with their own narratives. And they will often go to very dark places if you leave silence. So even if you're just repeating the same thing you did last week, it provides some comfort and certainty to folks.
It's true. Yeah, transformation can mean layoffs or it can mean, growth, right? Depending on how you define it. So let me ask you about this particular book, The Leap to Leader. I mean, has anything really changed? Let's look at the trajectory of the leap to leadership, say when you were doing your column versus today, because everybody talks about how much the conditions have changed in business. I would assume the conditions for being a great leader have not changed that much.
Well, I think they've gotten exponentially harder just in the last few years since the pandemic. What I'm finding is that I feel like there's a bit of a tailwind at my back with this book, because it feels very timely, because in a lot of our interviews with leaders and in our work inside companies, one of the most consistent themes we are hearing is that companies need their managers to step up as leaders. And to me, one of the basic distinctions between the two is that the historical model for a manager is like, give me the playbook and I will execute it. Tell me what to do. And we're just in this world now where there is no playbook. We're all writing it together. Every week there's some new challenge. There's really difficult conversations. There's balancing acts around, like, how do you be compassionate with your team while also holding them accountable and driving performance. And so to me, there is this important mindset shift where you're not just sitting there like, tell me what to do. You guys are giving me mixed messages. I don't know what to do. Where companies need their managers to step up and start, just embracing the idea that it is my job to figure things out. And it is, like, again, pick a number, but I do think leadership is 5 to 10 times harder for all the reasons we all know, right? Just the the sort of walls between the outside world and the inside world of companies are blurring. Companies are being looked to solve every problem and issue in society. The mental health issues, the Zoom culture, it just goes on and on. So managing is harder, leading is harder. So what I tried to do is basically provide a bit of a playbook, like what does that mean exactly, and how do you do it?
So, Adam, one thing I'm curious about is why are there still so few women who make that leap to leadership, at least in the very top ranks? Any thoughts?
I mean, yeah, I mean, how many hours do you have, right? I think there's so many layers to that conversation, and one of the things that I'm watching right now is that I think a lot of companies are saying the right thing about diversity and inclusion, and creating cultures where everybody has a sense of belonging, but I'm always looking for the gap between the trip and the brochure, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like companies are saying we're doing this, we're really committed to this, but I still am watching the C-suite teams, and frankly, you know, at a lot of companies, it's still they're overwhelmingly white and male. Solve that problem. There just has to be a real commitment to building the succession pipeline where you don't get sort of like the token female executive who shows up on every slide in the board meetings as possibly ready in 3 years for 5 different jobs, right? There's sort of different games people play. So to me, I find that we're in this interesting moment. My shorthand for it is sort of the triple click era of leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And I say that because it used to be that sort of companies would say things and maybe they were challenged like one click, like what does that mean? But I think people feel so much more emboldened right now in this era of stakeholder capitalism, both employees and investors, that you have to be prepared for somebody to keep sort of saying, well, what does that mean in practice? And what are you doing? Or what resources are you allocating to making that happen? You say this is important to you, but what are you doing about it? And what are the results? And so in a sense, as much as we all feel like there's not much progress, I am encouraged by the fact I do feel like people are holding companies more to account and pressing them when the actions don't match the words.
Let's get into the leap to being a leader. What are some of the core things that people do that might not be intuitive?
Well, I think part of it is being really wrestling with whether you want to lead people and being really clear in your own mind about why you want to do it. Because one of the things that happens at a lot of companies when they start looking at their succession pipeline and they say, okay, all these people are ready to move up and we see them as future leaders. What's interesting is that very rarely do companies go to those people and say, do you actually want a promotion? Right? Mm-hmm. As to a leadership role where you're managing more and more people. And what happens is they just assume everybody wants to move up into a leadership position. And then so people get promoted and they find out like, I'm not either good at this or I don't really want to do it or some combination of the two. And so I think forward-looking companies are starting to have more of those conversations about, do you really want to do this? And even in the absence of that, I mean, it's the first section of the book is called, do you really want to lead? And it's just being very clear in your own mind about why you want to do this. Because my feeling is if it's for money or power, like, you know, the power play, command and control leadership, that's not that moment is kind of past. You can't be that kind of leader. So if you're doing it purely for an ego boost, that's probably not going to work long term. And the money's not going to be worth it, right? Because these big leadership positions are really hard. So just being very clear with yourself about why you want to do it. And then once you decide you want to do it, I always encourage leaders to be very clear in their own mind about what, in effect, their elevator pitch is as a leader. Because what has struck me is that as people are moving up in their career, they're always told you got to have an elevator pitch, your elevator pitch ready. But that's essentially to answer one of two questions, like, what are you working on? What do you want to do, right? In terms of the next career move. But I don't think people prepare for their elevator pitch for who am I as a leader. And I always encourage people, like, we all as leaders have a brand whether we control that narrative or not, right? It's how people perceive you as a leader.
Yeah.
And so I always encourage people, you have to take control of that narrative. And I think the best way to do it is to be clear in your own mind, is essentially like, these are the 3 values that are really important to me as a leader. This is why they're important. Here are the stories behind them. This is why they're important for driving success to me. And I think that builds a level of authenticity and predictability, because I think as a leader, it's really important to be predictable. I mean, you probably worked for your share of bad bosses over the years too,
Yep.
but I think
Yep.
one of the things that is really tough about bad bosses, it's kind of like, what mood are they in today, right? Like, and so that level of predictability, the sense of like, these are my values, and even in times of stress, I am not going to walk back from these values.
Are they core values that have always been? I mean, your 10,000 hours is meeting leaders over many years. Do you think that the core values have changed, for this environment? Is there anything that tweaks?
I think the words that we're hearing more and more around humility and authenticity, right? Humanity. I think that's just been a big change in the last few years. And it's one of the reasons why leadership has become harder, because people who are new in leadership positions, they see, like, they're told, be authentic, be human. Like, what does that mean exactly? It's like, okay, I'm having a bad day, but do I share everything I'm feeling? Do I share my anxiety, my nervousness?
Mm-hmm.
And so finding that balancing act of being both transparent, of like, look, I'm having a bad day, this is why. You can do that, but you can't be sort of like always oversharing, right? There is a degree of acting as a leader, because you have to both acknowledge the storm clouds on the horizon, or the alligators at the edge of the swamp, if you prefer that metaphor, but you also have to inspire confidence. Look, I see a path to success for us, and this is going to be great, and this is how we're going to win. So I think at the end of the day, everything that's hard about leadership is hard because it is a balancing act. So you just kind of line them up in pairs, this idea of like, you have to be compassionate, but also hold people accountable. You have to create a sense of urgency, but also be patient. And you do need to be human and humble and authentic, but you also have to inspire confidence, because people don't follow people if they're going like, I don't really know, or, every day they're oversharing that they're having a bad day. So to me, that's like one of the challenges and one of the models that people have sort of get their heads around, that leadership is hard because everything's a balancing act. And you have to understand the center point between those 2 opposing forces, and then know what the right thing to do is in different contexts.
It's interesting because one of the hardest things to judge is what somebody will be like in a role where there's really nobody above them, I guess, except for the board. And, my perception is that boards often get it wrong, not maybe more than 50% of the time. But why are we so bad at picking leaders?
I think for a few reasons. One, I think there's, as we like to say at our firm, hope is not a talent strategy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of the times they'll look at sort of people for the next role, and they say, well, yeah, let's give them a shot, right? And maybe they can make the jump and grow into the roles. But I think a few of the traps that companies fall into is that they hire kind of based on central casting, right? Like, this person looks like a CEO. They've got presence. I mean, look, just like the number of CEOs in the Fortune 500
Right.
that are named John and are probably over 6'2", right? Like,
Right.
there is a certain degree of central casting. There's a little bit of the, whatever tribe you're part of, like, you went to this business school, and so did 3 of your directors, who are looking for the next CEO. So there's a sense, okay, you're part of our tribe, we trust you. I also think that one of the traps that companies are falling into is that they've used this model for the last 2 or 3 decades of focusing on leadership competencies, right? So they'll kind of disaggregate the CEO job and say, okay, you need these 20, 30, 100 competencies, and we're going to score you on each of these, and then compare it to our database of 10,000 other leaders. And maybe that worked in the previous era when things were more stable, but with so much uncertainty, with so much disruption, that feels too much like a rear view mirror. And so one of the things we're doing at our firm is focusing much more around this idea of what is the leader's character, like really understanding their authenticity, these values, the stories behind them. What is their track record? If you say these values are important to, what is the proof that they are committed to them and made those real? So are they self-aware? Are they authentic? Because in some ways, in this environment, there's so much uncertainty. You're picking a CEO for what the world's going to look like in 5 years. You can't game that out. So what you're essentially betting on is a person's character. So how do you get at that? The competencies have become table stakes, right? You have to be a good communicator. You have to have strategic thinking, executive presence, right? But it's the character thing that I think is now the differentiator.
So let me ask, in terms of who this book is directed to, let's talk about the individual, the ambitious individual. And many ambitious individuals have been working from their bedroom for the last 3 years. So that's certainly an impediment. They may perceive that they had to start this in their 20s. What advice do you have to them on a tactical level? And again, I know it's hard to do this, different industries, different life stages, personalities, but anything that you would want people to take away from your latest research that might be helpful for those who do want to make that leap?
Yeah, and the first thing is, again, this question, do you really want to lead? And if you are ambitious, be clear about why that is. And we put that word ambitious in the subtitle very specifically because we're in an interesting moment, right? Quiet quitting, great resignation. A lot of people are saying, like, I'm not willing to put in the extra effort because I'm not sure if there's a return on the other side of it. So it is for ambitious leaders and ambitious managers who want to make that jump to leadership. And I keep coming back to, like, if you want to move up quickly, because if you want to get in a leadership position, you essentially have to get promoted very quickly to get to a point where you can have broader impact. Right?
Yeah.
Like that's the goal. And so one of the sections of the book is how to win promotions without asking for them. And there is an asterisk because I know sometimes you do need to push for things, but just having that mindset of, like, how do I get promoted without asking for a promotion, and how do you deliver? And in some ways, I feel like the world has drifted a little bit. I think it's getting easier to really stand out as an employee, and it's a lot of the things that may seem basic, like always doing what you say you're going to do, and if you can't do it, telling people. But just that predictability, the reliability, trying to see the world through your boss's eyes, and going to your boss and saying, what can I take off your plate and bring it back better?
Yep.
And being brutally honest with yourself, where you're writing your own performance reviews and you're going to your boss and say, I've watched my own game films. This is where I think I need to improve. What do you think? And that takes a lot of confidence. It takes a lot of, like, internal sense of security. But to be the kind of person who is very coachable, right? Because you have to make it easy for people to give you feedback and for you to say thank you for that and acting on it. And if you go through your job with that mindset of always learning, you're going to get mentors, you're going to get sponsors, you're going to start moving up quickly. And I do think it's become easier to kind of set yourself apart. So in many ways, it's about, like, understanding what the people above you are looking for. They're looking for problem solvers. Because I think sometimes people go through their careers in early years and say, look, I've done this job for 2 years. I've done what you've asked me to do. Where's my promotion?
Yep.
And that's not how companies work. The people above you are looking people who can take stuff off their plate, can solve problems, and are sort of open-minded about the opportunities. I think there's a universe of difference between people who are just looking to move up in terms of, I want this title, compared to people who are looking for opportunities to do really good work that are going to get them promoted. Because if you sort of become that person, it's like, I'm happy to solve, like, just do whatever you need me to go over there and do that. I'll go fix that. Like, you are going to get so many promotions coming your way if you just have that mindset, rather than going into the company, going into the job and say, here are my expectations for my career. Because if you do that, then there's going to be frustration. There's going to be misalignment. So just go in with this attitude of, like, I'm here to learn. I'm here to help the company, help the team. It's just the pathway is going to open up in front of
That's
you.
very good advice. One other question, and this, since you've done a lot of research, is there an optimal age, an optimal stage of one's career to make that leadership leap? Because I think certainly in the minds of many boards, and I'm talking not just the CEO, but just as you move up, we often think about high potential as being in certain demographic categories. What have you found?
To me, it's a muscle you can start building at any age, right? And to me, a lot of it is just about sort of leveling up, like trying to see the world through your boss's eyes and your boss's boss. And how does the world look through the CEO's eyes and the industry dynamics? And it's just, rather than sort of saying, I've got my job, I'm going to stay in my lane and just focus on what I need to focus on. If you just start thinking at like a higher altitude and start thinking like you're the CEO, even if you're not, you're just going to learn more. And you try and really build your network based on authentic interactions. It's not just sort of about gathering business cards at a conference. It's building your network through doing actual work inside your companies, volunteering for committees, looking for any opportunity to sort of meet more people and have meaningful interactions around work with them. I just think you can start that at any age. And again, if you are ambitious and want to move up and for whatever reason, and even if it's to enrich yourself, I mean, as I quote my former co-author from the CEO test, Kevin Scherer, it's like moving up to these leadership jobs, it's really hard, and there's no guarantee you're going to get the top job. But as Kevin likes to say, the view is worth the climb.
Yeah.
You're just going to learn a lot about yourself. You're going to learn about life in general, like human beings, and it's just going to be a much more rewarding experience.
Yeah. And if you want impact, of course, the higher up you go, the more impact potentially you can have. So the book is The Leap to Leader. And Adam, nice to speak with you. I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Great. Thanks so much, Diane.